Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's edition of Simon Says. I was going to be continuing with our IC Guidance series. Last time we looked at music and God's plan and purpose and design for music and what that looks like in our lives. And today we're going to be looking at sport and in a very, very similar vein in terms of what did God have in mind, because it doesn't talk about sport a whole lot in the Bible, but we'll see what we can dig up along the way. So to begin with, we're going to have a look at the origin of sport, our earliest ideas of how it happened in history. We'll talk about its uniqueness and obviously the little bits that we can find in the Bible. And we'll have a think about what's God's intent for sport, look at some examples of Christians in sport, and what can we consider potentially as our response in regards to that. All right, so origin of sport, going way back. So we do have some early historical evidence that highlights sports like spear throwing, wrestling, archery, rowing, those sorts of things. And so a lot of those you can still see as Olympic events today. But you'll notice also that for the majority, they're basically combat games. A lot of them are related to war and murder and all the good stuff. And so probably originated as a way to keep themselves sharp to defend or attack against others in a more hostile world back in history. But obviously, in terms of just a structured, purely competitive event, famously, we have the ancient Olympics, the original. They're most commonly dated back to 776 BC, a little bit of debate there. But that was in Greece, and they happened at 4-year intervals, much like they do today, as we've kind of resurrected the idea for the modern Olympics. So while we have all of those events in some shape or form, modern advances, particularly with the Industrial Revolution, they've freed up more time for leisure, so people can do more sport, more stuff for fun. And so they've branched out beyond just the stuff that's related to their day job of, being a soldier or whatever, to develop more sports that are games for the sake of being games. And so we see team sports, ball sports, and, see things like football and cricket and all the common big sports we like to enjoy today. So came from the roots from the combat style, but now it's very much more a thing we do for fun, thankfully. And obviously, sport is a very unique event. I don't know if you've ever been to a State of Origin game or any large sporting event. There's nothing like it. Lots of people get excited and they yell and cheer. And I've always kind of found it interesting how people get behind a concept or an entity of a team and what that looks like. So sport is unique in that regard. There aren't too many things that people would pile into a stadium to attend. Music's probably the other key one that I can think of. But it seems like a lot of humans have this ingrained competitive spirit. We want to push ourselves, want to push others, and compete to see who's the best at any given thing, whether that be a sport or something different entirely. But like I mentioned earlier, as spectators, it can build this tribe-like camaraderie. We get around our team and support them. And obviously, it's a means of rest. We can just chillax and watch a game. We can participate, and it can be entertainment as well. And obviously, it keeps us fit and all of those other benefits alongside it. But even beyond the physical attributes, there's emotional and social ones of bringing everybody together. And sometimes it can even be new innovations. For example, the sport like motorsports brought a lot of innovations that have helped us in our day-to-day, like anti-lock braking systems for safety and traction control. So a lot of safety features actually originated as performance features in Formula One, for example. So society can benefit from other things as they develop new materials, tactics, logistics, all those sorts of things. There's very real benefits to the wider society as well. All right, so let's have a look in the sport in the Bible, because the Bible isn't really known for commenting on sport, but there is a little bit in there. And so I've highlighted some specific passages for us today. So one that kind of guided me as I wrote this was Romans 12:1. So we're called to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. And so while that can have a narrow application, I also think that it can be a wider thing in terms of everything we do, particularly with our bodies, but we should all do it all for the glory of God as an act of worship. We can worship God in many ways, and sport can be one of those, particularly if we're wired that way to be competitive and to enjoy participating in sport. And so the earliest example I could find was in Genesis when Jacob was wrestling with the Lord. So it says that he was alone and then a man wrestled with him. So it's like, what? How does that work? So clearly God was coming down to say hello. And God won. He touched his hip socket and his hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. So God won, human zero on that occasion. But in the New Testament, Paul touched on it a little bit, and it was usually in regards to running the race or training to improve yourself. They're kind of the ways that he went about that. So in 1 Timothy, it says bodily training is of some value. So yeah, it's good. Yeah, we have those physical benefits, awesome. But obviously godliness has a value in every way. So you're saying godliness is better, but hey, physical training's all right as well. Then in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 9, it says every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So again, the idea that there's a discipline, you're training, you're improving yourself. It can be in a physical way for sport or recreation, but also we can do that in a godly way with spiritual disciplines. And that has a longer lasting prize in eternity for ourselves and hopefully for others as well. And then in Hebrews 12:1, it says that, after the Hebrews Hall of Fame, so to speak, since we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw aside every weight, every sin, and run with endurance for the race that's set before us. So we run the race, we seek the prize, fight the good fight. The idea that the Christian walk is, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We're continuing to work for him, but uses that sport as a metaphor. And I found that a bit interesting as well. So not a whole lot of specific references in the Bible, but that doesn't mean that the Bible doesn't comment on sport, because it gives us guidance in all aspects of life, and sport is one of those, even if it doesn't get specific mentions quite so much. So what is God's intent for sport with that in mind? So just to recap, we as Christians, we're made in God's image, and he gives us dreams, he gives us gifts, abilities, talents, and a purpose for our life. We're not the way we are by accident. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. We're custom made for what he has in mind with us. And so if you have a sport bent, a competitive edge, if you're an athlete, he made you that way for that purpose. And he's given you dreams to play for enjoyment or to compete to win or whatever it might be. And that in some way reflects an aspect of his image. And so as Christians, we're called to be all things to all people. We're here to make disciples of the world. And that means reaching all people groups. And that includes athletes or spectators of sport or volunteers, mums and dads supporting, their kids, cutting up oranges, all that sort of stuff. We all have a role to play, big or small. And that can be in the sports space too. That can be an opportunity for us to share, and one that God has planned for us to do. And so we can ask ourselves, are we someone that just plays sport on a Saturday and goes to church on a Sunday? Or am I a Christian every day of the week who worships God? Sometimes that looks like singing in church, and sometimes that looks like playing on a field and being an ambassador for him in a sporting context where we do that. And so let's have a look at some examples of that in action, some Christians in sport. Can you hear that? Some pictures tell 1,000 words. Some play music. It sounds like maybe some synth and then some piano. So obviously this is from an iconic movie, Chariots of Fire, 1981. And so that details the story of Eric Liddell. So he was a runner. He's a devout Christian. He was born to Scottish missionaries in China. So that's an interesting story in of itself. But famously, he would not compete in his races on Sundays. So he respected the Sabbath and, I'm going to run every other day of the week. It's a gift from God and I'll honor him, but not on a Sunday because that's the Lord's day. And so he took what I mentioned earlier to heart. While he was quite accomplished in his work and mission and that sort of thing, he was still obviously an elite runner at a very high level, and he saw that as a gift from God. And so, why have I got this gift? What purpose does it serve? Well, it can only be to honor him. And so his way of honoring God was to run. And the movie details the 1924 Paris Olympics when he won the 400 meters event, and set a world record that stood for 12 years. And so he believes that God gave him that gift. He honored him in that, used it in the way that God would hope that he would. And he saw a lot of success as a result. Becoming closer to home and closer to current times is Marnus Labuschagne. So he's an Australian cricketer. He plays for the Test team and sometimes the limited overs teams as well, and the Brisbane Heat, Queensland Bulls. So he was born in South Africa, but he moved to Brisbane at age 10. He spoke barely any English. So I think he believed he started with Afrikaans, coming to school, what's going on here, learn the language. So he's done well. But these days he attends a Baptist church in Brisbane, I believe. And I mentioned the teams he's played for. And he's on the record in interviews and that sort of thing, saying that faith and his family are his top two priorities. So he's competing at the elite level. He's an elite athlete playing cricket, for the best team in the world. But he says that his family and his faith are the priorities. And I guess sport will come third or maybe fourth. But there's a little bit more to his story. He somewhat famously, in the last year or so, Amazon's documentary, The Test, had its second season. And in that season, this little sticker on his bat got a run. So he has this sticker on his bat. It's a picture of an eagle, and it has Isaiah 40:31 written on it. So that verse reads, "But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." And so he's had that sticker on all his bats for all of his test matches since his debut in 2018 for Australia. And he cops a bit of stick about it from his teammates. It was featured in the documentary, which is cool. He had an opportunity to share about his faith. The sticker was part of that. It's just a visual reminder of his faith, and he carries that with him quite literally. But interestingly so, his career's been interesting. It looks like lucky. There's been a lot of luck involved, and people talk about the luck. But as a Christian, I wonder if that's some favor. God, rigging the dice a bit to allow him to have opportunity. So this is from a news article. It says, not long after his Adelaide ton, analysts at CricViz declared Labuschagne the luckiest batter in the world cricket, given the data collected over the last decade and a half. No other player has had a higher proportion of catches dropped off their blade. It's not just catches, it's run outs, just weird things. He just doesn't get out as often as a normal batter. And it looks like it was a weird stroke of luck, but it might be something else. But it's not only when he's batting and getting away with not getting out. All through his career, it's just been a bit weird. The first we saw him was actually in 2014. He was a rookie player for Queensland, and he got a run as a substitute fielder in a test match. And he took this amazing catch close to the bat under the helmet. And so even from 2014, he was standing out a little bit more than you might expect. But each time along the way, every time he got called up for a new Australian team, it was always belatedly. He was never included in the squad or awesome. It was always, no, he missed out on the squad. Oh, someone's injured. We need a backup. Hey, Marnus, come on, have a run. And not only would he get into the squad late, he'd get into the team late. He'd somehow find himself playing. And so his career started out that way at international level. And the experts were like, who's this Marnus guy? Why did we pick him? How did this happen? And so you can kind of see like this, this hand of favor upon him all through his career. And even in Test cricket, he was famously Australia's first concussion substitute for Steve Smith in the Ashes. So Steve Smith got knocked out halfway through one of the hugest tests in years. He gets a run. He just swaps in halfway through the match. He wasn't expecting to play, and he did well. I think he scored a half century in each innings. And he's since been the second quickest batter to reach 3,000 test runs. So he's had a lot of success on the back of that. Even though his statistics beforehand suggested he's probably a middling player, he got these random call-ups, and he's been one of the best batters in the world ever since. It's a really interesting story. But more than that, it's not just the sticker on the bat that his teammates call it the crow or the pigeon or whatever it is. He doesn't just get a bit of ribbing for being lucky. He's also known for his character, which I think is really cool. He's a unique fellow. He's got his quirks. I don't know, I think that keeps things interesting, but he plays with joy. He plays with enthusiasm. He's like a kid in the backyard. He's always switched on. He's always diving after the ball. He loves fielding. He loves batting. He loves all of it. And so him and Steve Smith have kind of hit it off together. They've been cricket nuffies. They're really enthusiastic. They'll bat for hours. They were training really hard because they just love it so much. But he's also vocal in the field. He's always encouraging players. He's always positive. He's always focused on those 1%ers, the less glamorous things that can translate to success, but some other players might be, content to take some shortcuts on. So despite the luck aspect or how he gets into the teams, he's still known for his character, and I think that's wonderful to see for as a Christian, as an ambassador for his faith as well. All right, so there's some examples of Christian in sport, how they can do that. It can just be about how you go about your business. You don't have to be cultivating 1 billion followers and tweeting John 3:16. It can just be through your character, being an ambassador, being all things to all people, or as an individual, being something to that people group where you're given, where you have those dreams, where you have those skills and abilities. And so how can we then respond on the back of that, knowing that if you're like myself, you're probably not an elite athlete. There's only so many of them out there. But what might that look like? We can reflect on our gifts and our abilities we've been given, whether they're sporting or whether they're something else. So what are they? And that's usually a big clue of God's plan for your life. What are my dreams? What am I passionate about? What am I good at? That's a good clue of where God wants us to be and to be using those. And so it's just good to reflect, if I do have a passion or a skill or ability, have I narrowed the purpose of that activity? It's only that thing I do for fun, or it's only that thing I do at church, or it's only this, or it's only that, or it's only my work. I think it's important to reflect on, can it be wider than that? Is it more than that? It might be simple as changing our attitude about that thing, but not changing what we do necessarily, but just approaching it with an open mind and the blink is off in terms of what God might have in mind for that. And so if it's not sport, what does that look like for you? What are you good at? What are your dreams? And how can you kind of reflect on this in that way? What can you be to what people as a result? For me, it's playing nerdy card games. I can be Jesus to those people playing nerdy card games. For you, it might be sport, or it might be something else. All right, so that's it. We've had a look at origin of sport, where it came from in history, the uniqueness of how it brings people together. We had a look at it in the Bible, more generally in terms of discipline, but also generally in terms of God's intent for us and his purpose for us, whether that be sport or otherwise. And we had a look at some examples of Christians doing that well out in the sporting place, and we've had a chance to have a think about how we might respond, to these ideas in the gifts that we've been given in our life. So that's it for me today. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next time.